Welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we're jumping into a topic that, let's be honest, can be really difficult for Christians to wrestle with. We're going to be looking at it through the mind of Jonathan Edwards, specifically his doctrine of eternal punishment. It's a heavy subject for sure, but it was absolutely central to how he understood the justice and the glory of God.
And this is the core of it, right here. Edwards doesn't pull any punches. He's not really speaking in metaphors. He's making a very clear, convicted statement that the punishment of the wicked isn't just for a long time, it's absolute. It has no end. And this is really the starting point for the entire case he's about to build.
So you have to understand that Edwards is setting his view against two other common ideas. First, there's annihilation, the belief that the wicked just stop existing. And second, there's the idea that hell is a conscious suffering, but that it eventually ends. Edwards is arguing that no, both of those views don't quite line up with what Scripture teaches.
Okay, so the very first question that comes up, and the one Edwards tackles head-on, is about justice. I mean, how can a punishment that goes on forever possibly be just? It's a huge objection, and Edwards builds his answer with a logical argument that actually starts with the character of God himself.
So let's walk through this argument. The first premise is the foundation for everything else. Edwards starts with God. He says God is infinitely glorious, and because of that infinite glory, he is worthy of infinite love, infinite honor, and infinite obedience from every single one of his creatures.
And that leads directly to the second point. If God is infinitely worthy of all that honor, it just follows that the obligation we have to give him that honor must also be infinite. It's a matter of proportion, really. An infinite God is owed an infinite obligation.
Now, the third premise defines sin within this whole system. Sin isn't just about breaking some rule on a list. It's the failure to live up to this infinite obligation. It's an offense against a being who is infinitely glorious.
Which brings us to the conclusion of this part of the argument. If sin is a violation of an infinite obligation owed to an infinitely glorious God, then sin itself has to be seen as an infinite evil. See, the seriousness of the crime is measured by the worthiness of the one you've wronged.
So here's the whole logical chain laid out. God's glory is infinite, so our obligation to him is infinite. Sin breaks that infinite obligation, which makes sin an infinite evil. And an infinite evil, to be just, requires an infinite punishment. For Edwards, an eternal punishment is that infinite punishment. So in his view, it's not excessive at all. It's perfectly proportional. So if the punishment is just and it's eternal, what's it actually like? Well, Edwards is very clear that the second death we read about in Scripture is not the end of your existence. Instead, it's a state of ongoing torment. And the difference here is huge. Annihilation would be a state of nothingness, right? No suffering, no pain, just rest. But torment, on the other hand, is defined as a misery that you feel, that you are aware of, and that continues. Edwards argues that the Bible points squarely at the second one. And he builds his case right from Scripture and reason. He points to these descriptions of weeping and gnashing of teeth, which obviously imply a conscious experience. He also argues that the Bible talks about degrees of punishment. Some will be beaten with many stripes, some with few. That only makes sense if you're talking about torment, not annihilation. He also brings up what Christ said about Judas, that it would have been better if he'd never been born, suggesting a punishment worse than not existing. Also, for justice to really be seen, the person has to be aware of their punishment. And finally, their fate is tied to the devil and his angels, whose punishment is described as torment. All right, now Edwards looks at the duration. How long does this punishment last? He builds a very specific case from the Bible to show that this torment isn't just for a really, really long time, but that it actually has no end.
First, he talks about the timing. This punishment starts after the final judgment. It starts only after all the temporary things are gone, the earth, the mountains, the sun, the moon, the stars. When the whole universe as we know it is gone, then this punishment begins. The implication there is pretty clear. What's left must be eternal by its very nature.
This verse from Matthew 25 is a big one for his argument. You got to notice the parallel here. The wicked go into everlasting punishment, and the righteous go into life eternal. Edwards says the Bible is describing the length of time for both destinies as being the same.
And if you dig into the original Greek, you find that the word translated as everlasting for the punishment is the exact same word translated as eternal for the life of the righteous. His argument is all about consistency. You can't say one is endless and the other isn't when the same word is used for both.
He also brings up these absolute negatives you see in Scripture. This phrase from Mark, "Their worm dieth not, and the fire is not quenched," is an absolute statement. If that worm ever died or that fire ever went out, even billions of years from now, then the statement, "it dieth not," would be false.
And finally, he points out that the phrase forever and ever, which is used in Revelation to describe the torment of the wicked, is pretty much the strongest way to say endless in the New Testament. In fact, it's the very same phrase used to describe the reign of the saints and even the eternity of God himself.
So lastly, Edwards asks, what's the purpose of all this? He argues that this doctrine isn't just some arbitrary thing, but that it actually serves several good and important ends in God's bigger plan. He lays out 4 main purposes. First, it vindicates God's majesty, showing how serious it is to offend him. Second, it glorifies his justice as being perfect and unbending. Third, it actually helps the saints in heaven to understand more deeply the incredible salvation they've received. And fourth, this very awareness is meant to increase the happiness of the saints for all of eternity.
And this is maybe one of the most jarring things Edwards ever wrote. He argues that by seeing the just punishment that they themselves were saved from by grace, the saints' love and gratitude toward God will actually be intensified forever.
So, after laying out this whole theological system, Edwards brings it all back home with a personal, searching question from Jesus himself. Given these eternal realities he's just described, what could you possibly gain on earth that would be worth losing your soul forever? And that's the question he leaves for his readers, and for us, to really think about.